Hello. Thank you for joining the Climate Change 101 course brought to you by the City of Grand Rapids Office of Sustainability. My name is Annabelle Wilkinson, and I'm the Environmental and Climate Justice Specialist, and I'll be guiding you through this training today, the first of a series on climate change we will be rolling out in 2023. While we expect some may have this knowledge, we want to make sure each resident has a baseline of information on climate change and its impacts on our region. To begin, I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the beautiful ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, the people of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. We recognize the sovereignty of Michigan's indigenous nations and historic communities, both those who live here now and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. We want to express gratitude and appreciation to the indigenous peoples across this continent who have been living and caring for this land from time immemorial, who are still here and will always continue to be present in this place. So for this training, I'll be going over some climate change basics and discussing the impacts of climate change. We'll dive into some basic information that will address some common age-old questions, like how do you know the climate is changing? What is the evidence? And how is climate change going to impact me? To start, we're going to break down the difference between what is weather and what is climate. Weather is short-term changes in the atmosphere, which can be that it's raining out or that we haven't gotten much snow this winter, whereas climate is a long-term average of weather over at least 20 to 30 years. So one way I like to think about this is weather can be like the money in your pocket on any one day. Climate, on the other hand, is your overall wealth over your lifetime, or as that is often called, net worth, which would include your house or any other investments, any retirement savings, and any money you have in your savings account. Some years may have had a tighter budget than others, but your net worth shows all the ups and downs and identifies any trends over time. In this slide, we see global average temperature across the last 140 years. This is calculated from temperatures recorded from thermometers that are stationed around the world. In this graph, each of the small white dots represents the average temperature, weather, that year, and the black line shows the Earth's climate over time. Often you'll hear, well, it's really cold out, so the Earth can't be warming. Using what we learned on the difference between weather and climate, we can clearly see based upon how some of those white dots shift back and forth that some years are hotter and colder weather, which is completely normal, because just like your body accommodates small fluctuations in temperature, so can the planet. But when looking across the timeline at climate, we can see that overall, the trend is that the planet is warming, and that's where we run into some trouble. Yes, we've identified that the planet is warming, but why does it matter? Well, our planet has a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases. The sun's energy, through solar radiation, shines down and heats the Earth. Some of that heat energy bounces off or is reflected by clouds in the atmosphere. The rest warms up the Earth and gives off heat energy. The natural blanket traps about half of that energy, keeping the Earth a temperature we can live in. Once the Earth's surface is warm, it gives off excess energy to space as invisible infrared radiation. Try to think of a pot of hot water on your stove. You can feel what we think of as heat without even needing to touch it, but it's actually giving off invisible radiant energy. Essentially, this is the process that keeps our Earth's energy in balance. If we didn't have this blanket, there wouldn't be life on Earth. We would be a frozen planet of ice. Well, this blanket is natural, right? So what's the problem? Well, by digging up massive amounts of oil, coal, and gas, commonly called fossil fuels, the Earth is reabsorbing these heat-trapping gases, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet that it doesn't need. That extra blanket is trapping too much extra invisible infrared radiation, or heat, and that's why the Earth is warming. Just as we discussed earlier, for the Earth, like our body, fluctuations can be normal. But when you begin to run a consistent fever, you begin to look for ways to make yourself feel better, like taking a Tylenol or calling a doctor. As you can see from the images on the slide, the Earth is in need of a similar treatment. Greenhouse gases are the heat-trapping gases we discussed. The most significant greenhouse gases that come from human activity, industries burning oil, coal, and gas, are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. Water vapor is included because while it is not an emission from human activity, it is a greenhouse gas. The amount of water vapor that the atmosphere can hold increases as the atmosphere gets warmer, creating a feedback loop of trapping more heat. Carbon dioxide is often the greatest focus of removing greenhouse gases because it has contributed to climate change more than any other greenhouse gas from the burning of fossil fuels and cutting down trees and forests. And although methane may be 25 times more potent, it is mostly removed from the atmosphere in 12 years, whereas carbon dioxide sticks around longer, anywhere from 300 to 1,000 years. And that is why when you see solutions, they may just be focusing on carbon, and the term greenhouse gases and carbon are often used interchangeably. In the past, climate has changed from natural causes. Changes in energy from the sun, massive sustained volcanic eruptions, and predictable cycles in the Earth's orbit that drive the ice ages and the warm periods in between have all caused Earth to be warmer and cooler in the past, as are shown from the cycles in this graph. Scientists have examined each of these natural suspects to see if they could be the cause of the Earth's current warming, and the answer is no. According to natural factors, the Earth should be cooling at this time, very gradually, following the previous cycle. Instead, it's warming rapidly, and human emissions of heat-trapping gases are to blame. Now, I will say since the Industrial Revolution, we've made great advances, and I don't know about you all, but there are some things I really could not imagine living without, like a refrigerator or a car. But the vast majority of these great technological advances have been powered by fossil fuels and produce carbon dioxide. Because of this, since the beginning of the industrial era, human activities have raised atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide by nearly 49%. As you can see from carbon emissions, graphed over thousands of years, the amount of carbon dioxide produced since 1950 is more than what had happened naturally over a 20,000-year period globally. Now that we know we are causing it, where in our society are greenhouse gases coming from? Looking at both the total greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector for the United States and Michigan, there is a consistent trend that our emissions are coming from the fueling of our electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. The city's Office of Sustainability is finishing a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory and expect our emissions will be in line with these results. Please keep an eye out for additional information to come later this year. Overall, what we do know is that scientists have known the facts of climate change for a long time, since the 1850s, and over 97% of scientists say that not only that the climate is changing and that humans are responsible, but we are the main reason why the climate is changing, and the impacts are serious. But the facts on their own don't seem to resonate with people. Thankfully, our economic sector is stepping up to acknowledge this crisis, with local leadership from Consumers Energy and DTE creating goals for net zero carbon emissions, and Steelcase and Bazzani Building Company leading the way with achieving carbon neutrality. The community of Grand Rapids is poised to act on climate change, important considering the impacts climate change will bring. Now we're going to take a closer look at how climate change will impact Grand Rapids. Current changes that we are seeing in our climate is that the number of extreme precipitation events has increased by 40%, annual precipitation is increasing by 16%, and the amount of rainfall in our heaviest storms has increased by 52%. By 2050, our average air temperature is projected to rise 3 to 5 degrees. By the end of the century, our climate will change dramatically, with our summers more like Arkansas and our winters more like southern Ohio. We will also expect our total annual precipitation to increase and expect rain to fall in shorter, more extreme events, which could lead to both flooding and drought. So essentially, warmer temperatures and an increase in precipitation and extreme storm events are to be expected. One of the most important impacts of climate change that I choose to stress is the impact on our health. Climate projections predict an earlier and longer season for plants with pollen, which could increase allergies. Health effects such as heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat dizziness, and heat stroke can happen during high temperatures when the body is not able to cool itself by sweating. Heat waves can also worsen chronic conditions, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes-related conditions. Increase in waterborne disease outbreaks have been reported following a heavy rainfall, and buildings that experience water intrusion can develop mold contamination, which can lead to indoor air quality problems. With the incoming of warmer winters, earlier springs, and warmer summers, climate change creates ideal conditions for vector-borne diseases such as West Nile virus and Lyme disease to flourish from an increase in mosquitoes and ticks. And lastly, climate change and related disasters cause elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. The trauma and losses from a disaster, such as losing a home or a job, and being disconnected from neighborhood and community, can contribute to depression and anxiety. Extreme weather events have also been associated with increases in aggressive behavior and domestic violence. Some additional effects we'll see in West Michigan are an increase in lake effect snow for the time being. In a warmer atmosphere, water evaporates faster, so when a storm comes around, there is more water vapor waiting to be swept into the storm, creating more intense storm events. For the Great Lakes, this is creating more lake effect snow, since warm lake water is evaporating into the atmosphere, but temperatures are remaining below freezing. So West Michigan sees more snow, and that is going to continue. This could impact the quality of our roads and our community's ability to accommodate the trucking industry. Another effect of a warmer atmosphere and then warming lakes is an increase in harmful algal blooms. As the temperature rises in lakes, potentially toxic algae numbers will increase, creating nutrient pollution and killing fish species. An increase in algae blooms is not only harmful to human and ecosystem health, but also to traditional Anishinaabe cultural practices such as water walks. Less ice on lakes will also affect some Great Lakes species of fish that rely on ice cover for their spawning cycles, and it means less opportunity for tourism based on winter outdoor recreation, such as ice fishing. Climate change is also known as a threat multiplier, or an accelerant of instability, which essentially means that it has the potential to exacerbate other social forces such as water, food, and energy insecurity, as well as racial and low-income disparities. Those most impacted by climate change will be those who contributed least to the issue due to increased exposure to climate hazards, higher sensitivity, and a lower adaptive capacity. Globally, this includes women, low-income communities, and indigenous populations. In the U.S., climate change impacts are multiplied for some Black and brown neighborhoods that may reside in flood zones, have substandard housing, and lack access to green space due to the racist practice of redlining. In 2021, the EPA released a report that showed that in the U.S., the most severe harms from climate change fall disproportionately upon underserved communities who are least able to prepare for and recover from heat waves, poor air quality, flooding, and other impacts. The EPA's analysis indicated that communities of color are particularly vulnerable to the greatest impacts of climate change. As a response to these inequities, the climate justice movement addresses the ethical dimensions of climate change, shifting from the discourse on greenhouse gases and melting ice caps and polar bears into a civil rights movement with the people and communities most vulnerable to climate impacts at its heart. More information on redlining, its impacts on climate change, and the climate justice movement will be in a future training on climate justice. Another immense reason to plan for climate change is to prepare for the economic impact of ever-increasing billion-dollar disaster events. While taking a look at this graph, note that we are just talking about the state of Michigan. As you can see from the 1980s to the early 2000s, our numbers were fairly low, but as you look at the amount of billion-dollar disaster events from 2011 to 2021, you'll notice a steady rise in the amounts of events, and for 2021, there is a combined disaster cost of $1 to $2 billion. Why do we care? Climate change matters because it affects us and every part of our life. Longer, stronger heat waves, stronger storms, increase in heavy precipitation, and more winter storms can lead to an increase in flooding, power outages, drought, and damaged agriculture, which in turn can impact every aspect of our daily life, from the quality and access of our water, to energy demand, the food we eat and grow, the air we breathe, the nature we love, our mobility, and the successes of our businesses. Most of these issues are already happening and are being experienced in our community. That's why I'm a firm believer in saying this is not about saving the planet. The planet will be fine without us eventually. We are the ones that need to be saved. So, what can we do about it? We can try to meet the goals set out in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC's, Paris Agreement. However, reaching carbon neutrality by 2050 from limiting global warming to between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius above those pre-industrial era levels is a big task and will involve rapid, dramatic changes in how governments, industries, and societies function. The world is on track for around 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century if it doesn't make major reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It could breach 1.5 degrees Celsius sometime between 2030 and 2052 if global warming continues at its current rate. Now, it's hard when we encounter such big problems to know what to do. After all, we're only one person. Sharing scary data can lead to feelings of helplessness and not knowing where to start because fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, and to give up rather than take action. But connecting with others, taking actions, and sharing solutions will bring hope and empowerment. So an important first action to take for addressing climate change will be to start talking positively, and we'll discuss some strategies for how to do that in the next training. If you have any questions or would like to talk further about climate change, please reach out to the city's Office of Sustainability.